June 7th, 1963, 8:42 a.m. The steel gates of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary creak open for the last time for prisoner 1117-AZ. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson steps into the California morning carrying everything he owns in a brown paper bag. 56 years old now, gray threading through his hair. 11 years of federal time etched into the lines around his eyes.
The guards watch him walk toward the dock. They're thinking the same thing everyone's thinking, that they're releasing a broken old man who'll disappear into obscurity, maybe find a quiet corner somewhere to die. What they don't realize is they're about to release a king to reclaim his throne. And what happens in the next 72 hours won't just shake Harlem to its foundations, it'll rewrite the rules of power in America's most dangerous neighborhood. 11 years. That's how long Bumpy Johnson had been locked away on conspiracy charges. 11 years while his empire crumbled, while his enemies carved up his territory like a Thanksgiving turkey, while young hustlers who'd never heard his name took over corners he'd built with blood and brains. 11 years while the Italians, the Genovese family specifically, moved into Harlem like colonizers, extracting wealth from a community that wasn't theirs to exploit. But here's what those 11 years had really been. Not punishment, preparation. While other men broke under the weight of federal time, while they emerged hollow shells of who they used to be, Bumpy Johnson had done something different. He'd planned. Every single day, every single hour, he'd thought about this moment, about his return, about what he'd find waiting for him, and most importantly, about how he'd take it all back. 3 days on the California Zephyr from San Francisco to New York. 3 days to think, to strategize, to prepare for war. But this wouldn't be the kind of war most men expected. No armies of gunmen, no bodies dropping in the street. Bumpy Johnson had learned something in those 11 years of isolation that most gangsters never learned. The most devastating weapon isn't a gun, it's reputation. It's the ability to make men fear you without ever having to prove why they should. As the train rolled east, Bumpy reviewed what he knew. His old lieutenant, Marcus "Smooth" Henderson, had taken over operations while he was away. For the first 2 years, Smooth had done exactly what Bumpy expected, kept the organization running, sent money to Bumpy's wife, maintained the relationships that made Harlem's numbers racket profitable. But then the money stopped coming. The letters stopped. And according to the whispers that reached even into Alcatraz, Smooth had made his own deal. With the Italians, with the very people Bumpy had spent decades keeping out of Harlem. The betrayal stung, but it didn't surprise him. Smooth had always been ambitious. What surprised Bumpy was how completely the man had misunderstood the game they were playing. Smooth thought it was about money, about territory, about who controlled which corner and which policy bank. But Bumpy knew better. It wasn't about controlling Harlem, it was about being Harlem, and you couldn't be something you'd betrayed. June 10th, 1963, 6:15 p.m., Pennsylvania Station, New York City. No one meets Bumpy at the platform. No limousines waiting, no crowds of supporters. Just an old man in an 11-year-old suit, carrying a paper bag, disappearing into the evening rush hour crowd like any other passenger. But appearances, as Bumpy had always known, could be deceiving. He doesn't go home, doesn't stop to see his wife, doesn't rest after 3 days on the train, doesn't even change his clothes. Instead, he takes the A train uptown to 145th Street, walks 3 blocks east, and climbs 2 flights of stairs to a tenement apartment where a 73-year-old man named Junie Bird is waiting. Junie had been watching, had been listening, had been keeping track. For 11 years, while everyone else forgot or betrayed or moved on, Junie Bird had been counting the days until his boss came home. "Give me names," Bumpy says. "Not hello, not how are you, Not "thank you for waiting," just "give me names." Junie slides a handwritten list across the table. 15 names, men who'd gotten rich while Bumpy rotted in a cell. Men who'd taken his corners, his runners, his relationships. Men who'd forgotten that everything they had they owed to Ellsworth Johnson. But one name makes Bumpy's jaw tighten. Marcus Henderson, Smooth, the man who'd been like a son to him, the man he'd trusted with everything. "Where does he hold court?" Bumpy asks. "Small's Paradise," Junie says. "Every Friday night. Table 7 in the back. Shows up at 9 like clockwork, him and his crew. Acts like he owns the place." Bumpy looks at his watch. Friday, 6:30 p.m. In 2.5 hours, Marcus Henderson would be sitting at his usual table, surrounded by his usual people, living his usual lie. The lie that Bumpy Johnson was just a memory. Bumpy stands up, straightens his 11-year-old suit jacket, and heads for the door. "Get me a table," he tells Junie, "right next to his." Small's Paradise on 135th and 7th Avenue, the crown jewel of Harlem nightlife, where the musicians came after their gigs at the Cotton Club, where the policy bankers came to celebrate good weeks and forget bad ones, where for 11 years Marcus Smooth Henderson had held court like a king, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word, who laughed at his jokes, who competed for his approval. At 8:50 p.m., the door opens and a ghost walks in. 67 inches of quiet menace in a charcoal gray suit that's seen better days. Bumpy Johnson doesn't announce himself, doesn't make a grand entrance, just walks through the crowd like he owns the place, because in ways that matter more than money or muscle, he does.
The restaurant doesn't go silent all at once. It's more like a wave, starting near the door and rolling through the room as people recognize the man they thought they'd never see again. Old-timers who remember what Harlem was like before the Italians moved in. Young hustlers who'd only heard the stories but suddenly realized they're looking at a legend. Bumpy walks straight to table 8, right next to table 7, where Junie Bird is already waiting with 2 other old-timers, Willie Fish Jackson and Raymond Quick Lewis. 3 men who'd stayed loyal when loyalty wasn't profitable. 3 men who'd kept the faith when everyone else forgot what faith meant. At exactly 9 p.m., Marcus Smooth Henderson makes his entrance. 38 years old now, dressed in a cream-colored suit that cost more than most people made in 6 months. Diamond rings on 3 fingers, gold watch. He brings 4 bodyguards with him, young men with expensive clothes and dangerous eyes who look like they've never missed a meal or lost a fight. Smooth is laughing about something when he sees him. The laughter dies in his throat. The color drains from his face like someone pulled a plug. His bodyguards notice the change immediately, follow his gaze, and their hands drift toward their waistbands. But Bumpy Johnson doesn't move, doesn't react, just sits there with those cold, calculating eyes that had made strong men reconsider their life choices for 30 years. "Marcus," Bumpy says quietly, but his voice carries across the restaurant like it's amplified. "Come sit with me." It's not a request, it's not an invitation, it's what it's always been when Bumpy Johnson speaks, a command. And everyone in Small's Paradise understands that what happens in the next few minutes will determine not just Marcus Henderson's fate, but the future of Harlem itself. Smooth's bodyguards tense. One of them, a thick-necked enforcer named Leon, steps forward. "Mr. Henderson don't take meetings without—" He never finishes the sentence. Junie Bird stands up, and the .45 automatic in his weathered hand looks very serious despite his 73 years. Suddenly, the restaurant is full of guns. Smooth's 4 bodyguards have their hands inside their jackets. Willie Jackson produces a sawed-off shotgun from under the table. Quick Lewis has a revolver pointed at Leon's chest. But through it all, Bumpy Johnson doesn't even blink, just looks at Marcus Henderson with those empty, terrifying eyes. "Tell your boys to go home, Marcus," he says. This conversation is between you and me." Smooth's mouth opens and closes like a fish drowning in air. His hands are shaking. He looks at his bodyguards, looks at the guns, looks at Bumpy's calm, terrifying face, and makes the only choice a smart man can make. "Go," he whispers to his crew. "Boss," Leon starts. "I said go." The bodyguards back toward the door, hands still on their weapons, eyes locked on Junie's .45. They don't want to leave, but they also don't want to die in Small's paradise on a Friday night over a conversation they don't understand. When they're gone, Bumpy gestures to the empty chair across from him. "Sit." Marcus Henderson sits. The restaurant is dead silent now. 250 people frozen in place, watching Table 8 like it's a stage. Even the kitchen staff has stopped cooking. Everyone knows they're witnessing history. The question is, what kind? Bumpy signals a waiter. The young man approaches nervously, avoiding eye contact. "Bring us a plate of ribs, the good ones, and 2 glasses of bourbon." The waiter practically runs to the kitchen. When he returns, he sets down a full plate of ribs, still steaming, glazed with sauce that makes the restaurant famous. 2 glasses of aged bourbon. Then he disappears like smoke. Bumpy pushes the plate toward Smooth. "Eat." Smooth stares at the ribs like they're poisoned. "I'm not hungry, Bumpy. Listen, I can explain." "Eat," Bumpy repeats, and this time his hand moves slightly, just enough for Smooth to see the straight razor in his waistband. The same razor Bumpy had carried since 1935. The same blade that had convinced Dutch Schultz's men to find other employment. The same edge that had opened negotiations with Luciano himself. That's when Marcus Henderson understands. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a conversation. This is an execution with an audience. And everyone in Small's paradise is here to witness the end of a traitor. "Bumpy, please," Smooth's voice cracks. "I had to survive. You were gone. The Italians were taking everything. I made a deal to save the organization." "You made a deal to save yourself," Bumpy says quietly. "You gave them my policy banks, my collectors, my relationships. You told Genovese everything, and then you kept the money that should have gone to my wife." Tears are running down Smooth's face now. Real tears, fear and shame, and the terrible understanding that 11 years of betrayal are about to come due. "I was going to make it right," he whispers. "I swear I was waiting for you to come home." "I've been home for 3 days, Marcus. You didn't come see me, didn't send word, didn't send money to make up for 11 years of nothing." Bumpy's voice drops even lower. "You thought I was never coming back, thought you'd gotten away with it." He stands up slowly. Not a tall man at 67 inches, but in that moment he seems 10 feet tall. The entire restaurant holds its breath. "You know what the Romans used to do to traitors?" he asked conversationally, pulling out the straight razor and unfolding it slowly. The steel catches the light. "They'd make them eat their last meal in public, then they'd execute them in front of everyone, let the whole city see what happens when you betray your emperor." Smooths is hyperventilating now, eyes locked on the blade. "I'm not a Roman emperor," Bumpy continues, raising his voice so every person in Small's paradise can hear him. "But I am Harlem, and everyone in this room needs to understand something. When I went to Alcatraz, some of you forgot who built this neighborhood, forgot whose streets these are, forgot that respect isn't something you take, it's something you earn." He looks directly at Smooth. Marcus Henderson forgot. So now Marcus Henderson is going to help me remind everyone. Smooth tries to run, but Junie is behind him in a second, gun pressed against his spine. "Stand up," Bumpy orders. Smooth stands, legs shaking so badly he can barely support himself. Bumpy walks around the table until he's face to face with the man who betrayed him. Then, with the entire restaurant watching, he raises the razor to Smooth's throat, not to kill, to mark. In one quick motion, Bumpy cuts a thin line across Smooth's left cheek, not deep, just enough to scar. just enough to make sure every person in Harlem will know Marcus Henderson as the man who betrayed Bumpy Johnson. Smooth screams, blood runs down his face, staining his cream-colored suit. "That's so you remember," Bumpy says quietly, folding the razor and putting it back in his pocket. "Every time you look in a mirror, you'll see that scar, and every person who sees you will know what you did." He turns to address the entire restaurant. "Marcus Henderson has 24 hours to leave Harlem. Anyone else who wants to test whether I'm the same man who left here 11 years ago, you know where to find me." Bumpy Johnson walks out of Small's Paradise at 9:47 p.m. on June 10, 1963. He leaves Marcus Henderson bleeding at table 7, leaves 250 witnesses who will spread the story across Harlem by morning. And by sunrise, every hustler, policy banker, and street soldier in the neighborhood knows one thing for certain: the king is back. Marcus Henderson is on a bus to Philadelphia by noon. The scar is his brand now, a permanent reminder of what happens when you betray a king. Within 72 hours, 3 other men who'd carved up Bumpy's territory quietly disappear from Harlem. Not killed, just gone. Relocated with a clear understanding: stay away or join Smooth. The Genovese family, who'd moved into Harlem while Bumpy was locked up, sends a captain to negotiate. The meeting lasts 4 minutes. Bumpy's terms are simple. You have 2 weeks to pull out of Harlem. Everything north of 110th Street is mine again, non-negotiable. The Italians leave without arguing. They'd lost 3 soldiers trying to hold Bumpy's old territory in the past week. The cost of fighting him was higher than the profit. They'd learned what Dutch Schultz learned 30 years earlier: some men can't be bought, can't be broken, and can't be beaten. You either leave them alone, or they leave you in pieces. Within 6 months, every piece of Bumpy's empire is back under his control, not through war, not through bloodshed, through fear, respect, and calculated power. The night at Small's Paradise becomes Harlem legend. People tell the story for decades, pass it down to their kids and grandkids, about how Bumpy Johnson didn't need an army to reclaim his throne, didn't need speeches or manifestos. He walked into a restaurant, faced his betrayer, and with 1 razor and 250 witnesses, reminded everyone who really ran Harlem. You can lock a man up for 11 years. You can steal his money, take his territory, turn his people against him, but you can't take his throne, not if he's a real king. Bumpy Johnson proved something that night that goes beyond crime, beyond Harlem, beyond the 1960s. Power isn't about who has the most guns, it's about who commands the most respect. And respect isn't given, it's earned, through loyalty, intelligence, and the will to do what others won't when justice demands it. Marcus Henderson betrayed him for money. The Italians challenged him for territory. Every enemy thought Bumpy Johnson was finished. They all learned the same lesson that night at Small's Paradise. Bumpy Johnson doesn't make threats, he makes promises, and he keeps every single one. That's why they called him the Godfather of Harlem. Not because he was the most violent, not because he was the richest, because he understood something that most men never learned. True power isn't taken, it's recognized. And when Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz with nothing but a paper bag and 11 years of planning, Harlem recognized its king had come home. If this story moved you, if you understand that real kings don't need crowns, they need respect, then subscribe to this channel. Drop a like if you believe loyalty can't be bought at any price, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Marcus Henderson's position? Would you have stayed loyal to a man who might never return, or would you have taken the deal that guaranteed your survival? Next week, we're telling the story of Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the Caribbean immigrant who taught Bumpy everything he knew about power, and the woman the Italians called the Queen of Numbers. Don't miss it. Remember, in Harlem, respect wasn't given, it was earned, and Bumpy Johnson earned it
every single day.